We are officially in 2022. We want to welcome you to the newest edition of the Bruin Bible. We got ourselves an interesting one, a little drama occurring in Westwood. Dillon Gabriel, who had previously announced he was coming to UCLA 18 days ago, has decommitted from his transfer and is now heading to Oklahoma. We wanted to put out an emergency podcast. I've got Don Corleone himself in the house, Mr. Ryan Dyrud, the Godfather. What is going on, man? He is a trooper. He's holding out. He's a little sick at the moment. Are you feeling any better?
Yeah, my biggest remedy is whiskey. So I think that, I don't know if that's a problem or just means I'm an adult that lived through a pandemic quarantine. But yeah, I'm doing good. Glad to be here, Will. Glad to talk some UCLA.
Love it, man. I'm no doctor, but I think whiskey's a solid remedy right
there.
I
think so.
Yeah, exactly. And then we got our man, the madman himself, Mr. Jamal Madni. You can catch him on Draft is in Session, our show. You can catch his writing on LAFB, one of the better writers we have on our website. Jamal, what is going on, my man?
Great to see you, Will. Excited to talk about the Bruins.
Well, my heart sank last night, unfortunately, due to the news of Dillon Gabriel. Huge loss for UCLA. It was something we were really excited about, guys. This guy has an 18-8 career record. 70 career touchdown passes to 14 interceptions, over 7,000 yards of total offense. Decided to go with Brett Venables to Oklahoma, and a huge reason for that was his old quarterbacks coach at Central Florida, Jeff Lebby, is now the OC at Oklahoma. Crushing loss, but it makes sense given some of the quarterbacks that they've produced in recent years. If you want to reach that ceiling as a QB and get the attention of the NFL, that's a good place to go. Ryan, where were you when the news broke, and how crushing of a loss is this to UCLA?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was just at home, I'm assuming, yesterday. But first of all, you guys, I got to say, you guys have like the best nicknames for each other. The Madman and Will the Thrill. I mean, those are some fantastic podcast nicknames. But, we were talking in the chat at first. It was, I was like crushed. I was like, I think we were all just like deflated, like disappointed. Because when he announced come to UCLA, I was like, all right, here we go. Chip staying. Oregon didn't steal him away. We're getting a quarterback that has all this talent that can totally run this system. He's experienced. He can come in and just really take the reins from DTR. And I think we all felt pretty confident about Ethan Garbers, but getting a guy as established as what Gabriel was, I think, was the excitement for us. And so when that all of a sudden was stripped away, it was like, oh man, just deflating. But it makes sense. As soon as Caleb Williams announced that he was entering the portal, even though he said that Oklahoma was still a potential him staying, I think the writing was on the wall there, with as you mentioned, the OC being at Oklahoma. Now, one thing before you throw it over to Jamal, and this is not me reporting, so I don't want anyone out there thinking I'm reporting anything, but I've heard on the interwebs and seen in other chat rooms, when Gabriel transferred, and this is me just trying to spin it some positives for UCLA. I always try to throw a positive light somewhere in there.
We love it too.
When he was transferred to UCLA, a lot of his former teammates at UCF kind of came out and had said that, not totally a team player, kind of only was about building his own brand. Again, not reporting. This is what I had read from somewhere, that he was actually available and back from injury this last season, but decided to forego coming back at all, just focusing on his future for the NFL, not making him a bad guy at all. But just little things like that, like, okay, maybe that wouldn't fit the most in what Chip Kelly is doing at UCLA and what they're building, because they want team first guys. So I think if you can look, if that is true, again, not reporting, but things I've seen come to light from former players, maybe the deflation that we all felt might not be quite as extreme as we thought.
And Bruin fans, just like Ryan said earlier, this was something that I think was an initial blow to us, but I believe this is going to be a positive long-term when we look at some of the other options that we may potentially have. So stay tuned for that. Jamal, I want to hear your take on Dillon Gabriel. I know we did the initial podcast with him coming. We were so excited to get him. How are we feeling about Dillon Gabriel right now?
Yeah, well, it's, certainly it's a tough loss, just given the fact that, you're talking about an individual who's had 3 years of experiences as a quarterback, really big games against BYU, Cincinnati, 18-8 as a starter, 5-1 touchdown interception ratio, 70 touchdowns, 14 interceptions. So clearly someone with a lot of production. And when you look at, the future of UCLA at the quarterback position, you want depth as much as possible. from a competition standpoint. But again, it's, the shocking thing about this is just the world of the transfer portal that we live in. And I think this is the first time we're being exposed to a tertiary market, where we sort of think of the transfer portal as the secondary market. But now there's, you don't have security until really that first day of spring practice. And in many ways, it's sort of interesting between kind of quarter system schools and semester system schools, where UCLA is a quarter system school. Class started yesterday, January 3rd, but semester schools start January 17th. And so even if you're a quarter system school and you get a guy, you can't be feeling completely confident until that you have that guy until a week into the semester, because they always have a chance of leaving your school and going to a semester school. And so it makes really the key dates for the transfer portal very, very interesting. And it's really more only until end of January strikes do you really feel comfortable now that you have a guy at least through spring and into the season. And I think that's really a lesson learned, not just for UCLA, but nationally, as folks are really starting to understand and get more comfortable with the dynamics of the transfer portal.
And like you said, he was not enrolled in classes, so he did have that opportunity to make that transfer back to Oklahoma. And the initial disappointment stems from the fact that we saw so much potential with this guy. Granted, he went to Central Florida, but that's a pretty good conference. It's not a Power 5 conference. Cincinnati was just playing in the college football playoff coming from that conference. Memphis made some big bowl games from there.
Houston.
Still a ton of NFL talent within that division. And what I envisioned for Dillon Gabriel is he could fit that Darren Thomas, that Jeremiah Masoli role that Oregon really had with those quarterbacks early in the Chip Kelly era. And Dillon Gabriel's a better thrower than both of those guys. He has one of the most beautiful deep balls you'll see. I understand what happened there. Caleb Williams leaving left a huge hole there. And he probably has a phenomenal relationship with Jeff Lebby, just being honest, for the fact that he wants to go back and work there. It didn't work with Dillon Gabriel, but I think this could be a positive moving on. There's one rumor going around right now that I just want to tie up really quickly. I know UCLA fans are sick of hearing about the Chip Kelly talk. Is he going? Is he staying? Was this transfer due to maybe a Chip Kelly instance of him, being bought out after the January 16th buyout where his, clause goes to zero, he'd be effectively fired. Jamal, at a 0 to 100% chance, do you think Dillon Gabriel transferring was more so of a reason of Chip Kelly maybe not being there next season?
Well, it doesn't help, but I think you're looking at something in the 10% range. I mean, I think this is a lot more to do with familiarity of the offensive system and kind of an opportunity at Oklahoma to fill a void where, again, the talent is in place, especially in 2022 for Oklahoma to go and potentially win the Big 12. Gabriel will have an opportunity to play in a lot of big games, potentially a Big 12 title game, potentially a New Year's Six or a CFP game. And there's nothing like building your draft stock, especially if he is a little bit more me than we, based on some of those reports. Nothing quite like playing on that platform and those stages to really boost your draft stock. So I put this at a very minuscule level of the Chip Kelly situation, but it doesn't help matters. And I think it's more optics and strategy about UCLA football longer term that's more concerning about why this isn't getting done more than specifically just Gabriel.
Kind of that cloud hanging over if it's coming, if it's going. Any smoke to that fire, Ryan? Where would you give it out of 0 to 100%?
Of just him leaving because of the Chip Kelly.
Yeah, Gabriel's transfer being encouraged due to the uncertainty of the Chip Kelly situation.
I agree with you. I personally would go 0%. I think it's all to do with as soon as Caleb Williams said he was going into the portal, he saw the opportunity. I can go to Oklahoma. That, let's be honest, Oklahoma right now is a better program than UCLA. I don't think anyone would deny that. Having the familiarity with the OC. So I think it was more of a upgrade for Dillon Gabriel. And he saw that the opening with the QB leaving, saying, okay, cool, I can go to a bigger program. I know he's from Hawaii, but hey, Oklahoma's closer to Florida where he's been the last 3 years. I don't think that probably has much to do with it, but little things in the back of your mind. And I think it was more of that as opposed to what we're probably going to get into next, this cloud still hanging over the program with Chip Kelly and the coaching carousel.
Yeah. I mean, the Chip Kelly thing has been ongoing for a while. Until we have more concrete evidence on what's going to happen, I don't want to speak too much about it. I know this podcast is a very pro Chip Kelly podcast. We feel like with the time, we will be able to get to that 9 to 10 win range year in and year out. I do want to touch on this. A lot of reports right now are leaning to potentially DTR coming back. And at first I was kind of like, I don't know, this isn't great, but I would welcome a DTR comeback given how successful we were on offense last year and the development we've seen. This was the number one Pac-12 offense in scoring last year. We averaged 35.3 points per game, topping the entire conference. DTR has been great for us, man. I mean, 61 career total touchdown passes, 26 interceptions. Last year, he took it to 21 touchdown passes, 6 interceptions, and he ran for 609 yards and 9 touchdowns on the ground. I think what people forget with that, too, is the sacks actually count against his rushing total. So he should have had closer to 800 yards on the ground with close to 10 touchdowns. And the DTR experience, is it perfect? No. Hell no, it's not. I mean, I go back to the USC game. His first 2 passes were both intercepted in a rivalry game. But he turned on the performance, and he went for 6 total touchdowns after that. I think DTR coming back for a 5th year in Chip Kelly's system is a guy that can really do some damage. And I think it's a good, consolation prize, if you will, for the Dillon Gabriel situation, is we got a guy coming back that knows how to move the ball on offense, clearly is within the system, and can make plays. What do you think about DTR potentially returning to UCLA, Ryan?
Yeah, I'm with you, Will. I'm kind of like, at first I was like, I'm kind of ready to move on, see what's next, especially with Dillon Gabriel originally being here. And even with not, it's like, okay, Ethan Garbers is a big candidate, I think, that we're excited about. And then there was the news yesterday that, well, hold on, Caleb Williams has expressed interest in UCLA, and there's mutual interest there, which that would be a huge upgrade, which maybe we'll talk about later. But then the more you think about it, and there's so many variables to this, Will, and Jamal can touch on this too, but and you kind of feel bad for DTR in a sense that his legacy at UCLA seems to be so tied and tarnished to those first 2 seasons, because his 3rd year, only being 5 games or whatever it was in the COVID season, was exponentially better. And last year, far and away, he was a top 2 quarterback in the Pac-12. I mean, him and Cameron Rising were probably the top 2 quarterbacks in the entire conference. And you said it, only 6 picks, so cut down the turnovers by a huge margin. Used his legs a lot more, like we all kind of wanted to see throughout his tenure because of how athletically gifted he is. His leadership role grew. His teammates loved him. His coaches loved him. So I think when you look at last year, he needs to get a lot more credit, and people should say, we want this kid back. I mean, look at what we did with him. If we could just give him some freaking defense, then maybe this would be a 9 and 10 win team. And some of those games like ASU, and he didn't play in the Utah game because that was Ethan Garber's first start. But if the defense kind of showed out a little bit and didn't give up 6 explosive 50-yard plus plays against ASU, we could be talking about a 9-win team vying for that Pac-12 championship. So when you look at that, you would want him back. And then the last point I'll make, Will, and this is the interesting one, and it goes back to the Chip Kelly thing. The fact that he hasn't made a decision yet, and I know that he has time to do so, and he's probably talking to all different avenues. But to me, there's no way DTR comes back to UCLA if Chip's gone. Because why would he come back for his 5th year with a whole new system, whole new coach? So he would only come back if Chip is here. So that tells me that, maybe there is a little fire behind the smoke of what's going on. I necessarily don't believe that, but just kind of peeling that back and thinking about the DTR situation, maybe there is, or he is just truly torn on if he thinks he's going to get drafted or if he would just be a free agent acquisition. And if he goes back another year, he could move up into the 4th or 3rd round, having a good 5th season. So it's hard to really decide, but there could be something to that of him saying, well, hold on, I'm going to wait till this Chip thing is figured out and then I'll make my decision. Because if Chip's gone, I'm for sure gone. If Chip's back, I'm a lot more tempted to come back and average 35 points a game again at UCLA and bring us a Pac-12 championship.
That's completely fair, too. And I just want to say for the Chip situation, if Jarman is really willing to move on from him this late in the process, he better have a great backup plan, because UCLA fans will be very upset if we do not get a coach that is credible enough to replace somebody like Chip Kelly, given the history he has within the college football game. Jamal, would you be cool riding again with DTR? Initially, Ryan and I thought it wasn't a great option, but I think we're kind of talking ourselves into it right now.
Yeah, Will, and I think it's playing out kind of how we thought it would, where DTR and reports are that he's put the feelers out there with the NFL people, and it has not come back overwhelmingly positive that he's ready as a draftable prospect for the 2022 draft. And so if you're DTR, you want to sort of assess those options and say, hey, there's a golden opportunity here to come back to UCLA with Chip Kelly, with an established culture of 8 wins now moving forward. And I think he's got a tremendous platform, because if you look at UCLA, you're looking at a situation where most probably your 2 leading rushers are going to be departing. Most probably your 2 leading receivers are going to be departing. And so in many ways, if UCLA can replicate the success offensively, statistically, as well as wins and losses wise in 2022 that they did in 2021, well, guess what? Who gets the lion's share of that credit? It's going to be Chip Kelly and Dorian Thompson-Robinson. And that is a way, that is a recipe to really up your draft stock. And I think from a UCLA fan perspective, this guy is the most dynamic athlete that's played at quarterback at UCLA arguably ever. I mean, Hundley was a great athlete, not quite the ceiling that DTR had. Rosen was a great thrower. Cade McNown was a great thrower. You go back, Aikman was a great thrower, obviously. But in terms of raw athlete, there's nobody that UCLA's had at the quarterback position that really is the complete package athletically that DTR is. And I think Bruin fans have to be comfortable with the reality that if DTR does come back, hey, chances are Ethan Garbers is going to transfer. But, you've got the kid from Inglewood that's waiting in line behind. And that's just sort of the world that we live in now, that depending on who you recruit, you're probably going to be able to retain 80% of them. And, the other 20% are going to be hopping around if they don't get the playing time. But DTR coming back in that system with a Cam Brown, with a Kaz Allen, with developing Keegan Jones, with Bobo, with some of the guys that we talked about, I think it's a really exciting possibility.
And Ryan, I remember talking at the beginning of the season, like we were making our predictions. This is one of the first Bruin Bible episodes we had. And we were talking, we're like, is it crazy that DTR could be a dark horse Heisman candidate if it really came down to it? And we both agreed that there was an opportunity there if he were to put it all together on the football field. And, we've seen guys come back for that extra year of eligibility and kill it. Not to compare him to these guys, but we've seen the Joe Burrows. We've seen the Baker Mayfield. We've even seen the Kenny Pickett this year, who's going to be a first-round pick. These guys have, used that extra year and have taken their games to the next level. If DTR truly is coming back and he can maximize his talent, which Lord knows he may have the highest ceiling of any quarterback, like Jamal said, in UCLA history, if he can get to reach his ceiling, this could be a big, big year for DTR and UCLA. And let's hope it goes that way if DTR comes back.
The last thing, if I could add about DTR, is this is also the first opportunity where he's going to be able to really test the evaluation process in its entirety. Everyone kind of forgets that season finale last year against Stanford, he hurt his shoulder and he was sort of contemplating leaving at that point. And that was certainly premature, but the injury really forced him to come back and not really go through the process. And I think for him to truly be able to go through the process and understand his deficiencies, I think will create tremendous value in 2022 for him if he decides to come back to UCLA, because all those names that you guys mentioned earlier, they all kind of had an opportunity to test the waters and knew what they needed to work on. And that's what really created that jump the following year. So I think there's a lot to be excited about if DTR does come back.
Well, UCLA fans, let's hope he's working with the Jordan Palmers, the Steve Clarksons in the offseason to get better at the quarterback position. Tweet came out yesterday that made me very excited and should make UCLA fans very excited as well. Brandon Huffman, very connected guy within the college football ranks. Caleb Williams. The reason Dillon Gabriel is going to Oklahoma is because Caleb Williams decided to transfer. Brandon Huffman came out and said there's mutual interest between UCLA and Caleb Williams, despite him being a Lincoln Riley recruit who is now at USC. Also considering early, these are all early reports, LSU, Auburn, Miami, teams like that. But if you can get, we were just talking about Dorian Thompson-Robinson maybe being the most talented quarterback UCLA's ever had. If you can get Caleb Williams, and I implore you guys, if you were not able to watch him at Oklahoma this year, go watch his high school highlight tape. It is one of the greatest things you'll ever see from the quarterback position. This guy, as a true freshman, completed 65% of his passes for 1,900 yards, 21 touchdowns, and 4 picks. Oh, by the way, he played the Oregon Ducks, a team that UCLA is very familiar with, in the bowl game. 242 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks. Lit it up after Lincoln Riley departed for USC. This is the guy. And I fully believe Caleb Williams is a Heisman candidate as early as next year, wherever this guy lands. If UCLA can somehow get Caleb Williams, what will this mean for this program? I'm starting with you, Madman. Where are you going with this?
No, I mean, let's not forget what Kirk Herbstreit said at the end of the Red River game when Caleb Williams came in for Spencer Rattler and led that dramatic comeback, 56-48 of OU over Texas. Herbstreit proclaimed him right then as the next face of college football for the next 2 to 3 years. You are talking about potentially getting the face of the sport to come to UCLA. It changes the whole trajectory of the program. It changes the entirety of the expectations. When you look at the existing 5-star receiver at OU, who came out today and tweeted essentially saying, I'm going to go where Caleb Williams ends up going. There's potentially a sort of a package deal there, and just the domino effect of being able to get a 5-star quarterback would be absolutely historic. And I know that Caleb Williams' father is very focused on the next 2 years of Caleb Williams being in a program and being in a system where he is going to be best developed for the NFL. And that's another reason why Chip Kelly makes so much sense at UCLA, why I think a Brian Kelly at LSU for Caleb would be attractive, why USC would be attractive by the guy who recruited him to begin with, and why potentially even Ole Miss with Lane Kiffin would be also very attractive. I know there's also a lot of reports with Caleb about Georgia. That one I don't quite get as much because they have not been known to be quarterback developers and doesn't really fit Williams' requirements. But the fact that he's even considering UCLA is a huge step in the right direction for this program, because really the concentration of talent in this sport is so pronounced, where 80% of the talent goes to 20% of the teams. You need that first guy to sort of jump into the pool and believe in your brand, believe in your program. And if that first guy does it, then everyone follows. You know, there's that famous YouTube video of how to start a movement, and one person starts dancing, and then the second person starts dancing, and then everybody starts dancing. And if you can get that first dancer in Caleb Williams, you can really create a movement at UCLA. It would be the biggest signing for UCLA since Brett Hundley, and probably with a lot more at stake than getting Brett Hundley. It would just be massive.
If Caleb Williams is as good as we think he is, it may be the best signing in college football, period. Like, absolutely. I've never seen a bigger free agent than this. Ryan, give me your thoughts, my man. If Caleb Williams is wearing the blue and yellow next year, how freaking excited should we be? Because the Rose Bowl is going to be back officially for regular season football. We're not talking about just the bowl game. Regular season, it's going to be nuts.
Oh, game on, fellas. Game on. No disrespect to DTR, everything I just said about him, but if Caleb Williams comes, holy crap. And you have that rivalry now, the storylines between him and Lincoln Riley, which I'll get to in a second. But, you know, just to tell everyone kind of his talent wise. And I know recruiting stars, everyone, I actually asked someone, I'm like, what's the difference between a 4-star and a 5-star? And they're like, well, it's pretty slim. What's the difference between like a top 5-star and a top 5-star? It's fairly slim. But just to compare, Josh Rosen, who was the highest rated recruit at the quarterback position for UCLA, was rated as a 9.932. Caleb Williams is a 9.969. So a higher rated recruit than even Josh Rosen was, who I know didn't have the most storied career with UCLA, but everyone knew what his talent was. Williams, I think, has proven he has a little better head on his shoulders, at least through one season as a freshman. And why I think there actually is some truth behind this interest in UCLA is two things. And one being the guy that recruited him, Lincoln Riley, when you know the recruiting process and these coaches go to living rooms, I know this gets overstated, but there's some facts to it. Coach goes to your living room and says, I want you to come and play for me. I'm going to be basically your pseudo parent now as you're, getting into your adult life. I'm going to get you to the next level. And then that parent just abandons you out of nowhere after the last game of the season and goes to USC to take a job worth $12 million a year. You remember that and you say, wait, I can go now to the school in LA that also is a great school, hasn't been as good at football as that school historically, but I can get a great education. I can live in Westwood. I can be in Hollywood, and I can beat the guy that recruited me who lives 15 miles away from me and prove that he made a mistake. That is why I think there is some real legit legs to Williams being interested in UCLA, and it would be a slam dunk home run if he comes. Chip Kelly immediately gets a 5-year check immediately. If Caleb Williams comes.
Immediately. And the first guy I'm calling if I'm Chip Kelly, one of the bigger donors. Who else came from Oklahoma to UCLA? Troy Aikman.
Oh, Aikman's on the phone.
Tell him right now. Get Aikman on the phones, man. Let's make this a done deal. Yeah. This needs to happen, man. If we can make it work. Oh, man, Caleb Williams, if you are somehow listening to this, we plead you to come to UCLA. Last thing I want to say, and this is kind of controversial too, dealing with Chip, there have been some defensive hires on the coaching staff.
Yeah.
Jerry Azzinaro's still there. Are we at the point where we think Azzinaro is coming back? And I hate to end on this note, but Ryan, I'm going to start with you. I think there's above a 60% chance now that Azzinaro comes back because we've hired 2 different position coaches. The defensive line coach we got, former USC guy, don't even know how to pronounce his last name completely. Kohuaha. I think that's the best I can do. It is a huge Hawaiian last name. And then we got the linebackers coach, D-line coach from Washington. So that's a big get.
Yeah.
But how high do you think Azzinaro, at least chance-wise, is coming back to UCLA next year?
Oh, man. I mean, it seems honestly like 100% at this point. I think as much as it pains me to say, but you don't make hires to work under a guy if you're then going to move on from that guy. It just strategically, I don't make any sense unless Chip has told these guys ahead of time, oh, by the way, we're going to make this move at DC. So this will be your new boss, essentially. I know Chip's the overall boss, but the position coaches kind of report to the coordinator. So the fact that they made these 2 hires, who are good hires, I think they're really good hires, but Az is still the guy that, calls the plays on defense and is still the head honcho and has not, coached a top 100 unit since he's been here, which is insane. And you imagine with this offense, if you can just get in the top 50 of defenses, how good this team can be. So it's, we'll have all offseason to talk about it, all offseason to break it down. Obviously, we try to put some positive spin on these things and see what they can do. But at this point, I don't really have much positive because I think it's a done deal that he's coming back, which is shocking. And that may also be one of the things of why there's still a cloud over Chip Kelly's head, because maybe the brass of UCLA is saying the same thing. Hey, we like you, but you guys cannot be a package deal. We got to figure this out. So moves can be made. Maybe I'll go down to 90% because maybe boosters, the 2 of them there are in the football program, can push him to say you're gone or he's gone. Take your pick.
Jerry Azzinaro is the problematic friend you bring to a party who gets way too drunk too early. And you're like, hey, man, you're not the problem, but get your buddy out of here because he is causing a scene. We need to get that guy out. It's just been too bad.
But you always bring him, and it screws you over.
Yeah, you're doing fine. You've been socializing. You've been passing around drinks.
Yep.
This guy's cool. His friend, that guy sucks. Let's get him out of here. This guy is the worst.
Yeah.
Jamal, give me your thoughts on Azzinaro potentially coming back because I'm a little bummed about it, but there is so much still to be optimistic about with UCLA moving forward.
Absolutely, Will. And I think that the percentage that you give Azzinaro coming back is the exact same percentage you give of Chip Kelly coming back. And so as a fan, whatever that number is, those X is equal to Y. And I personally, for me, that number is 100%. But I think we can't really discuss Oz without kind of the elephant in the room of why this thing is happening with Chip. And I think essentially, not to drag it too long, but I think essentially we're in a situation where UCLA athletics has given Chip an extension that's really not to Chip's liking. And it's partially because I think the buyout number of that extension is pretty low. And I think that there's sort of a lack of job security that Chip is seeing in terms of what that extension could be. And I think that's the stalemate. And I think ultimately where this converges is potentially outside of a Caleb Williams signing that ends the conversation for a meaningful Chip extension, that Chip may play out the last year of his contract here without the extension on the back end and just be a lame duck coach and see where the season goes. And then, have the contract renegotiation. Because I think at the end of the day, Chip isn't Jarman's guy. And I don't know if Jarman is completely team Chip, but I don't think Jarman is anti-Chip either. And I think Jarman is probably taking it from the perspective is I'd love to see one more year before I have to put my big boy pants on and make a real decision. And the question now is, could I get away with an extension that isn't really a big buyout number? Chip doesn't necessarily, I think, agree. And I think that's where the conflict is. And we could be headed for 2022 without, long-term clarity, which may be okay, considering that UCLA isn't really a player in traditional recruiting and does rely on the transfer portal so much that even if Chip goes into a few living rooms with sort of a little bit of a lame duck status in 2022, it's not the end of the world because that wasn't his strategy to begin with. And so I think that's kind of where we're sitting here. And in terms of who's better, there's nobody out there that's better right now, with the exception of one name potentially, and that could be Matt Rule. Ooh. And, Matt Rule has been a program builder at Temple, at Baylor. And, if he gets fired by the Carolina Panthers next week, the timing of that kind of works out. And, if there's a phone call to be made, it would be made to Matt Rule. Otherwise, there's nobody out there.
Wow, I love that. Wasn't even thinking in that direction. Jamal coming up with an awesome answer for potentially Matt Rule. If things going to move on from Chip Kelly. Defense aside, I think we've got optimism as UCLA fans in 2022. This is the first Bruin Bible episode of the new year. Whether it's DTR, whether it's Caleb Williams, fingers crossed, whether it's Ethan Garbers, this team is going to be competitive, and it's going to be a team that's going to be worth watching. Bruin Bible, we're out. Thank you guys so much. Stay tuned. We got episodes coming to you all off season.